Hello everyone, welcome to today's class. So today we are looking at the subject computer data conversion. Computer data conversion. And simply what we are talking about here is what happens to our data when we input it. Of course, we know that the CPU is charged with processing our data. So what happens when the user sends in input into the CPU? What happens? Okay, to understand this properly, we have to understand what are registers. Now, registers are a kind of storage within the CPU that holds our data. So that means input goes into the CPU and it has to be kept somewhere so that it can await processing. And even while it is being processed, it has to be kept somewhere. So the name of that place where it is stored or kept temporarily is called a register. Now, registers are actually smaller in sizes compared to other memory units of the computer, such as your RAM or your ROM. They're actually smaller, but the good thing about them is that they are fast. So instead of the CPU going back to the RAM to obtain data, it just simply picks it from the register. So it's located within the CPU, basically for storage. Okay, before this data is being processed, it has to be kept, like we said. Now, it is actually kept not as we think it is. It is kept using an address. So we locate such data using what is called an address. So simply put, an address is nothing but a memory location of a data. So that means if I have bunch of files, the only way I can be able to locate a particular file for processing is because there's an address. It's just like an address where we can locate a human being. So every data has a specific address that is used for storage. It is not just stored anyhow. Must be a particular address which we can use to locate that data. The CPU uses the address to locate data during processing. Okay, so that is how important addresses are. And very important is that each memory address can store just a single data or instruction. So they are specific in their storage. Good. Now, data travels from input unit to the CPU and then after being processed through what is called bus. Just like the bus in the human society is used for transporting human beings from place to place, data is being transported through bus, and they are simply wires on the motherboard that enhance movement or flow of data. So such bus could have things like a bus width and a bus speed, and it is using this bus speed and bus width that determines the amount of data that travels from the input unit to the CPU for processing. So the bus width and the bus speed determines how fast and how much data is being conveyed. So grammatically, the bus is just route through which data travels. So by diagram, some buses are for address while some are for data, as you can see there. Now, types of registers within the CPU. So there are many types. The first one is called accumulator. So as the name signifies, accumulate, to keep track of what this ALU is working on. So after processing, it has to be kept somewhere. So we keep it at the accumulator. Next is storage register. When data is fetched, it has to be kept somewhere before processing. So it is kept in the storage register. Then we have another kind of register known as address register. Now this address register keeps track of the address of all the data that need to be stored, that need to be processed by the CPU. So we keep record, or we store the address of such data in the address register. Then we also have the general purpose register. Now this one deals with virtually every kind of storage within the CPU. So addresses, addresses of data, and so on and so forth are kept in the general purpose register. Now the control unit also have its own register. So we have certain registers that are found within the control units. You have them 3 in number. You have what is called the memory data register, current instruction register, and then sequence control register, all working together within the CPU, within the control unit of the CPU. Now, how does CPU process data? The first thing is that there should be an input from the user, then it is being stored, and then the control unit fetches them bit by bit for storage, and then after being processed, they are being stored at the accumulator. So that is the procedure or the process whereby data passes through as it's undergoing processing. Okay, now to understand this properly, data processing happens in a cyclic form. It happens in cyclic form. So that means it's endlessly. So the first thing is the CPU fetch the data from the main memory, which is the RAM, and then decode the data, that is understand what the data is all about, and then execute it. So that is how the CPU is able to achieve this data processing. Thank you for listening.